What's up, fam? Agent O here with another Thrant. And for those of you that don't know, my Thrants are basically thoughts, rants, kind of mixed together. Sometimes it's more thought, sometimes it's more rant. You get it. Anyway, I'm here today to talk about the new or the upcoming Iron Fist Netflix Marvel TV show. Because I really wanted to see this show happen because I do like that character. He's not one of my favorite all-time awesome favorite Marvel characters, but I have always liked Iron Fist and Power Man. So when I heard they were going to actually do this show, and then it was up in the air as to whether the show was going to get made or not. I was I was hoping beyond hope it would get done, and it looks like they're finally going to do it and not pussy out. So I'm thrilled, and I wanted to do a video talking about some of the things I would really hope to see done in an Iron Fist show, which I'm pretty sure probably won't, because for some reason these people who do these shows don't have the kind of imagination that I think would really bring these shows on Netflix to life and really make them. They're already pretty good, and in some ways they're better than some of the other superhero shows that are out on TV. But I think there's things they could do that would elevate them beyond a shadow of a doubt that they'd be better than the other, the at least the shows that DC is doing. Because right now, Flash is killing it. Like Flash right now is my favorite superhero TV show out there. It's because they embraced everything that makes the Flash interesting. And I think they should do that with Iron Fist. Iron Fist is that character that kind of came from that time in the 70s when the kung fu Hong Kong action movie genre was just really really big in like New York. And you had kung fu theater on TV. I don't know how many people who grew up back in the day remembered kung fu theater on the weekends and stuff like that. And that's where the character comes from. He's basically a white version of a kung fu master, because that's what the guys who created him over at Marvel wanted, because they were fans of that genre, and they wanted to insert a white guy in the same role that they saw all the Chinese characters play. And that's where he comes from. And I think that the people behind the show should actually embrace the genre of the comics origin. They should embrace the fact that this would be a martial art TV show, essentially. They should use the cinematography that we all know. Those of us that really pay attention to uh, martial art films and the way they're shot and produced, they should embrace all that and incorporate it into the shooting style. Should be incorporated into the show, and they should take some physical comedic cues from Hong Kong films, and they should also embrace the kind of like whimsical wuxia magical elements of Hong Kong films, because we're already going to get a Doctor Strange movie, and that's going to be, I guess, the introduction to the supernatural magic that exists in the Marvel universe. So that's going to be a part of the MCU. Why we have to have movies that kind of introduce these ideas when we already have films like Harry Potter and the Percy Jackson films, and when we have a lot of films that deal with magic. I mean, we have the Lord of the Rings movies. So why this has to be so beyond the suspension of disbelief in the comic book movie genre is just fucking beyond me. But I guess they figure the audience is too dumb to embrace magic, and it would be beyond their suspension of disbelief or whatever. So this is why they're doing it the way they're doing it, which I don't agree with. I think they should just if people are willing to watch these films, they should just throw them into the water and let them sink or swim. If they don't like it, then that's fine, and if they do, then that's great. But it's comic books. It's the only genre where you can have mythological, you can have theological, You have science fiction, you have supernatural, you have magic. It's all there, all wrapped up in one world. It's anything goes. So to try and put realism, once again, to put realism in a superhero film is an oxymoron. But anyway, I'm getting off the subject. Since one thing I would love to see is a distinct difference in the physicality when it comes to a person who practices martial arts and a person who doesn't. Like, a person who practices martial arts should physically, they should just, everything that they do should hit harder, stronger, and faster than somebody who doesn't practice martial arts. Kind of like in Tekken. Like, if anybody plays Tekken, you notice some of the strikes and the reactions to the strikes are exaggerated to where, like, someone will throw, like Brian Fury will throw his hard ass roundhouse, his that turns his whole body or whatever, and the other character gets hit by it and they fly like halfway across the screen. That's the kind of things I want to see happen. I want to see Iron Fist doing, or characters who are on Iron Fist level or above doing in this show. You know, when they're fighting and they hit somebody, it should show, they should show the reaction, and the reaction should be like, oh shit, that guy just got rocked. And when he uses his actual, since Iron Fist has chi based powers, when he uses his powers, it should be even more so. I'm not saying every single hit he's going to just be sending people flying away and all that. No, it's just when the time comes for it, that's what you'll see. You know, I want to see stuff like that in this film. With Kunlun, they should, since this show is going to have, you know, powers, and they're talking about mythological characters like Shaolo the dragon. It should be more of like a wuxia. When you see Kunlun, the city, it should be more, the hidden city should look more like something out of a wuxia movie with mysticism thrown in, because that's where it comes from. That's the origin of this comic to begin with. I also think that the city should be that the people that live in the city should be multicultural, in order to show that anyone can be a martial artist or hold the title of Iron Fist. And also, I think it would help to tone down that whole appropriation issue that people have with Iron Fist, which I can understand. It's justified, because it could easily fall into that it could easily fall into a negative outlook on, you know, here's a white guy doing the same thing that Asians do, but he's doing it better than them. That whole thing, that whole trope, which I'll get into a later on in this Thrant. But I think by making it multicultural, it helps. By making the denizens of the city multicultural, it helps ease that, because now anybody can do it. Anybody could be Iron Fist. It's not just white guy, fish out of water scenario in a city full of Asians, and he's the only blonde hair, blue eyed thing that they've never seen before. And so now it's, oh my god, look at this guy, looks so different. We've never seen a guy looks like this before. You know, you can just discard all of that by putting people of all different shades and colors and whatever, from all different ethnicities in Kunlun, and nobody will bat an eye towards it. Plus, the city should be multicultural, because martial arts is universal and anybody can learn martial arts. There's martial arts styles all over the world, not just in China and Japan and Hong Kong. There's plenty of the other, martial arts, it was invented in India. So, why not throw Indian people in there? Brazilian slaves created capoeira. So why not throw some Brazilians or black people in there too? It all makes sense. There's martial arts everywhere. Frank Dukes, the guy who the Bloodsport was loosely based off of, he created his own style of ninjutsu. So throw white people in Kunlun. This isn't rocket science. Like, this is how you get over those issues that people would have when it comes to whitewashing in movies and television and stuff like that. Just diversify your bonds, as Jizzle would say. Anyway, this is what I think would help when it comes to showing Kunlun and getting past the limitations that were originally established with the original comic book. You know, we you don't we want to get you want to get the cultural appropriation angle out of this, not so it's a non-issue with this show. One of the other things I really want them to do, and this is major, is to hire an actual Hong Kong martial arts action director slash choreographer. This is tantamount if you're going to embrace the genre from which the character in which this show will come from. The action scenes in the show, they shouldn't look like an American style of action choreography. The timing of the movement, the camera positioning, even the editing, like everything has to echo a Hong Kong action movie. The fight choreography in the style of like of Daredevil and in Jessica Jones, that, as Strident likes to call it, struggle fighting, which is so true, because these people who have powers and abilities that are beyond the regular humans and they're still struggling against average people, average thugs. We don't need to see that shit. Not in Iron Fist. It just wouldn't work on this show. We need long shots, we need wide angle shots, and we need intricate choreography. We need somebody who actually knows these styles inside and outside to come up with action sequences that show that the fighting is like a chess match, because these guys are masters at the craft. These guys are better than the average Joe. So it's not going to be a fight where people are just slugging it out. It's going to be, oh, I'm a black belt, you're a black belt. So now we're going to be going at it. We're going to be, I'm going to counter your strike with this block and then come through with the sticky hand technique, and then you're going to counter with, monkey steals peach, and then it's a chess match. And that's why you need a choreographer to come up and show that these guys really know their stuff, and that it's not going to be just a bunch of kickboxing and then throw in some aerial XMA moves that you just throw in there randomly. And Daredevil, I'm looking at you when I say this. We need to see emotional content, as Bruce Lee would say, in this show. I think that would help set it apart from what we've already seen from Daredevil and Jessica Jones. And it has to be its own thing. Visually, the action has to be its own thing. I have a bunch of clips that I want to show that will kind of further explain what it is that I'm trying to get across when I say that the action choreography has to look a certain way. It has to feel a certain way. And these clips are from a movie called Knockabout. It's directed by Sammo Hung, one of my favorite action choreographers, Hong Kong action movie actors, martial artists, you name it. And it stars Yuen Biao. It's his debut film as a leading actor. So this film kind of has everything that I like to see, that I like to see in an action film. And as far as examples that I would love to see them incorporate in some way in an Iron Fist TV show. And I'm going to get into that right now. Now, one of the things that I think would be interesting to see, instead of just straight up hardcore fighting, brutal fighting, would be to have fight sequences that have kind of like a theme or a comedic type of scene. And it doesn't have to be straight up fighting. It could be something that you've always seen in old school, like in the 70s and the 80s Hong Kong action movies, that you'd see, like, that I call it kung fu keep away. And it's when you have two characters kind of struggling to get an item, whether it be some money or a bowl, or like a bowl of food or something, and they're sitting there, and it's this whole little choreographed sequence. And as you'll see in the example I'm showing you, that this is the kind of thing. Now, they don't have to actually use exactly this kind of comedic take, but something like this that kind of echoes this kind of scene where they're just going back and forth, trying to get a certain item. One person's trying to get it, the other person's trying to keep it away from them. And it's funny, and it's lighthearted, it's something different, but at the same time, it's it just gives you something else, another added layer to the story and to the show. So it would be something that you would that I enjoy it. And in this case, with this scene, it doesn't go on for very long. The length of it is just long enough. It's like less than a minute, and I think that's the length of time that you should have when you do this sort of sequence. Because if you do any more than that, it's going to get kind of boring, and unless it's Jackie, because Jackie has done those types of sequences where he uses like the scene in Young Master where he's using the fan, and it's really intricate, and it's really it's interesting because it's so intricate. There's that part where he throws the fan and then he catches it, and he shot that take like 700 or 800 times or something like that. Literally, it was well over like 100 times until he got it right. But it looks really, really good, and it's so extravagant that it keeps your attention. So that's one of the times where it actually is the exception to the rule. So here's another example of a comedic fight scene, but this one's has actual kung fu in it. It's not kung fu keep away, but it has recurring, I don't know how you want to call it, like a recurring theme where, I mean, the whole theme is these guys just can't lay a hand on the master because they're just regular guys at this point. They're not martial art masters. And that goes back to my original point of when somebody fights another person who isn't skilled, they should not be able to lay a hand on them. And here you see this fight scene where it's done in a comedic fashion, and you keep seeing Beardy or Thundering Mantis. For those of you that know who I'm talking about, Larkar, I think it's Larkar Lung. He's the one who keeps getting the black eyes and keeps getting knocked out. He just can't do anything, and that's funny. Like, it's a theme that you keep seeing throughout the whole fight scene. They even did it once in an episode of Batman the Animated Series. I think it was the first episode of the 4th season, when Batman was fighting a bunch of thugs, and one guy kept trying to sneak up on Batman, and he kept getting back fisted by Batman the entire scene. And it was funny because you can't sneak up on Batman, so it works. And if a person who's doing an animated series can see the value in this kind of choreography, then they should be able to do this sort of thing in a live action TV show. But it just goes without saying. This is one way you could change it up and not have everything feel grim dark. Even the action sequences don't have to feel that way. So here is another scene, which is kind of funny, but this is more an example of what I'm talking about when I say regular people shouldn't be able to lay a hand on people that have been properly trained in fighting. This is like a literal example, because the scene is set up that the two main characters actually learn some martial arts, and the master tells them that, okay, now you're at the level where you can beat ordinary people with no problem. And so they happen on this scene where they happen to come up in the market scene where these guys are extorting money from the people selling food, and they start fighting them, and they realize that these guys are just ordinary guys, so so their kung fu automatically puts them at a level above them, so they just go through and just start beating the snot out of everybody. And it's a funny scene because they're being amazed at their own ability, and they just start playing around with it. They're like kids with a new toy, and that's why I love this scene. It's just it's just really nice physical comedy that isn't goofy. Physical comedy doesn't always have to be goofy and slapstick. It can just be straight up funny, and it can actually be kind of cool at the same time. So that's pretty much my reasoning for why I wanted to include this scene in a list of many scenes and many ways that they could actually do this these different types of fight scenes in this show. I'm not saying every episode in the Iron Fist TV show has to have a fight scene, but it would be nice that when they do, they actually have some kind of meaning behind it. There's actually a theme rather than just, oh, these guys are bad and Iron Fist is good. He has to beat him. There has to be something more to it, because a lot of these Hong Kong films, even though a lot of them were kind of cheesy and some of them were just fight scene after fight scene after fight scene, you came across the really good ones had meaning behind some of those action sequences. So I think that if they're trying to embrace the martial art movie genre, they should also follow suit when it comes to doing choreographed fight scenes. It shouldn't just be a lot of the same that we've been getting. There should be more to it, basically. And I'm just including this scene because I love Sammo. I love Sammo Hung, and he's just so incredibly agile for being as big as he is. And he's the one who choreographed this movie. The movie's called Knockabout, and this is the movie I'm using as an example for the kind, not exactly these kinds of fight scenes, because obviously the tone of Iron Fist is going to be a bit more serious. It's going to be more serious, and I guess since grim dark is the in thing now with comic book movies, that's what they're gonna do. Which I don't think they really need to go that route with Iron Fist, but I'm sure that's what they're gonna end up doing. But I just like this scene, and Sammo's such a great choreographer and a fighter that if I could, I would have either him or Donnie Yen be the ones that would choreograph this show. Just because I think they both have the imagination to pull off a fight scene or to pull off choreography that would be interesting and would be thematically fitting for the show. Donnie Yen has done kind of like anime style, fast flurry fist type fight scenes, so I could see his style of choreography translating pretty well to a comic book TV show. And he's worked in TV in the past anyway in Hong Kong. Sammo is just friggin' phenomenal. I mean, one of the all time greatest action choreographers that I've ever seen, and he would have no problem, I think, doing stuff like this for Iron Fist. Also, if you're gonna have an Iron Fist show and you're gonna embrace the Hong Kong action movie genre for your show, then you have to have some kind of elaborate training sequence of some sort. You have to do it. Lau Kar Wing, I think, was the one who kind of introduced these elaborate training sequences where they're also, it's kind of like an obstacle course in some sense, because each sequence has you learning how to do something a certain way. Like this one, he has to learn how to do backflips without bending his knees. Um, in Enter the 36 Chambers, he had to learn how to balance himself, so he was slip sliding on. They had him doing headbutts, and the ground was slick with oil, so they had to stay in like a horse stance as they were doing the headbutts on the sandbags that were hanging from the ceiling. And just these kinds of action sequences in order to strengthen the body and condition their skills and whatnot. I think you have to have something like that in an Iron Fist TV show if that's the direction you're going to go in. And so I dig it. I dig this stuff because it's always different. They never do the same kind of training thing sequence twice that I've ever seen in any of these films that I've watched, and I've got a lot of them, believe me. So I want to see stuff like that. Also, as far as the shooting style goes, um, there's a camera technique that at the time was used in like every single film. I can't remember what the guy's name is that originally did it, but it's this zoom in. It's this quickly zoom in, or it's a camera cut that goes to an already zoomed in shot, and you're gonna see it in a little bit right here where you see Yun Biao going through his forms. There's a shot where the camera cuts and it's already zoomed in, and then the camera immediately zooms out like super fast, and it's a staple in Hong Kong action films. You see it all the time, even when you don't realize it. You see it, and when it comes up, I'll I'll rewind it and show it to you in slow motion just in case you missed it. Right there. And I'll rewind it again so you could see it because it kind of happens so fast you don't notice it. And it's done throughout this entire movie. Samo recognizes that and he incorporated it into his shooting style. And I wish I could remember that person's name. If anybody out there happens to see this and they know exactly who I'm talking about, please comment in the comment section because I'm really bad with names and I really would have loved to have remembered it so that people could actually look it up and check it out and see for themselves. But yeah, you gotta have these things in order to make the show feel authentic to an old school martial art action movie. And of course, you have to have a big fight at the end of the series or at the end of that season. Once again, there's that quick zoom out that I was talking about earlier. Um, you have to have a final fight. It wouldn't feel the same if you didn't. I mean, it's been a staple in like every action movie you've ever seen. There's always some big climactic battle, and I think if you're gonna do a season finale similar to the season finale in Daredevil when Fisk and Daredevil finally got to fight each other, you definitely have to do that with Iron Fist. And I'm not gonna show this entire sequence because it's just really long. I'm going to actually skip to too near the end just because there's one other thing I want to cover, which is when you use a previous fight scene or something previous in the scene to set up uh, a moment in the very end of the film, and that's when, and in this case, uh, there's a training sequence where they use the jump rope to basically build up their stamina because they didn't have a lot of they got winded pretty easily, and Samo and Yun Biao's characters are fighting this main guy. I forgot what his name is too. I'm sorry. um, but they're fighting him, and he's just beating them. Like there's no way this guy's so good that the two of them can't take him on. So they have to level the playing field, and they do this by basically winding him, by making him jump rope and fight at the same time. They already conditioned for it. during their training, but he's never gone through that sort of thing before, and so they use that method in order to level the playing field to beat him. And once again, these simple ideas can be incorporated into Iron Fist, into the TV show, and it would actually be good. It would actually, I mean, depending on how they use it and what exactly they do, it has the potential to actually be good and be interesting. This isn't anything new. It's not some new film technique or storytelling technique. This kind of storytelling has been around forever, but it feels like when it comes to certain action films, it's like they kind of have gotten away from telling these kinds of telling stories this kind of way. Instead, it's just let's just make let's just make the fights really interesting or really brutal or just really imaginative. And you can have all those things, but let's not forget that the fight scenes can also be a part of the story and not just bookends for the story. And that's basically the kinds of sequences and the kind of action that I would love to see them incorporate when it comes to the fighting in an Iron Fist TV show. And once again, I have to go back to my point of after you see Danny Rand become Iron Fist, we should not see him being beaten up by common thugs and criminals. It's a problem that I just had with Daredevil. I just can't stand the struggle fighting. I don't want to see Daredevil struggle fighting. One of the best fights in that entire season was when he fought the Hand Ninja, and that was because that guy was at or above Daredevil's level, so it made sense for him to get fucked up in that scene. But the hallway fight that everybody lauds over as so great, which when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this is pretty good. And it's only good because we're not used to seeing that kind of fight choreography in an action film, especially in Hollywood action films. Hollywood action has gotten really lazy when it comes to hand-to-hand fighting. And so when I first saw that hallway fight, it was like a breath of fresh air, because I'm not used to that kind of fighting. In Hong Kong and in overseas, like in Thailand with like Tony Jaa and his stunt team, and in Hong Kong, that shit is another day at the office. Like that shit's not really anything because like if you look at Tom Yum Goong, in America it's called The Protector. There was that long shot with Tony Jaa when he was going up through the building, and it was one take, and he beat everyone. He was throwing people off the balcony or off the edge, and you see them fall all the way down to the first floor, and that was all one shot. They cheated in the hallway fight on Daredevil because that was not one shot. I give them props though because they did a good job of making it look like one shot. And they also had to deal with the fact that they had to find ways to switch out the main actor with the body double, with the stunt double. And they did a good job with that. I mean, it was very well planned out. It was storyboarded very nicely. I give them props. I give them props for that. It was done well. But it wasn't one shot. They cheated, and they cheated very nicely, but Tony Jaa and his team, they probably didn't have the budget to do all that, so they had to do it in one shot, and it worked, and I love it. I love the fact that they pulled that off. But if I had been in control of that shit, he would have just Daredevil would have just beat the shit out of everybody, got the kid, and left. Maybe they would have had like maybe one or two guys that knew what they were doing, so that there could be a little bit of some back and forth. Not necessarily a struggle, but they could go back and forth. But at the end, Daredevil's going to win, and he's going to walk out of there with that kid. So yeah, you have to only characters or individuals that are known to have had significant training pretty much should be the only ones to give Iron Fist a run for his money. Uh, that's if they just change that, that would be such a big step in the right direction, and it'll be another step in setting the show apart from the two previous shows. Um, and the other thing I wanted to mention on is there was the whole big thing about changing Danny Rand's race, which I'll get to more of that in a bit. But instead of changing his race, I think what they really should do is introduce Shang-Chi, the master of Kung Fu, or basically the master of martial arts, as a recurring character in the show. He shouldn't be treated as a one note character or the flavor of the week or flavor of the episode character or cameo appearance. He should constantly be in the show, returning in the show, and he should be equal to Rand in every way except martial arts. I mean, because he is known as the master of Kung Fu, and that's all forms of Kung Fu, all forms of martial arts. He's a martial arts master, and he also has his own set of abilities that that are chi based but are used in a different sense. Iron Fist can basically focus his chi into his fists and basically strike in such a way that he can break through anything. Basically, it's just a really super powerful punch. But Shang-Chi can use his chi to reduce his heart rate or accelerate his healing. I've even seen in comics where he threw a fucking fireball, and I'll include images and shit of all that. But he has a wider array of uses for his chi than Rand does. Rand is kind of like a one-trick pony in a sense. So when they fight, he shouldn't be able to beat Shang-Chi. Like, no way. I'm sorry. I won't buy it. I won't buy it at all. Also, it would be cool to see Shang-Chi show up in in Kunlun, not as somebody who's trying to go for the title of Iron Fist, but as somebody he should always be trying to expand his knowledge of martial arts. So he shows up wanting to learn the Kunlun style of Kung Fu to add to his already wealth of knowledge of Kung Fu, and maybe he could show up and maybe help Rand in some way, kind of like Sam Seed from the old school Yun Wu Ping movies, where Sam Seed was played by Yun Wu Ping's father, and he would show up randomly in movies, teach the main character something, and then leave. And you never knew which movie it was he was going to show up in, which was kind of the cool thing. But I think they should do that, but not have him actually leave and never show back up again. They should do that with Shang-Chi, but he shows up, he kind of helps guide Rand a little bit, and then he kind of goes off and does his own thing and then shows up again. Maybe Shang-Chi is after somebody from Kunlun, and that's why he's there. He has his own agenda or his own subplot, so that would be a way for them to develop his character along with Rand's. It's just, this shit could easily write itself. I swear I want to be on this team so I could steer this show in the direction it really needs to go in. But anyway, I want to talk about things that they shouldn't do. And one of those things, like I mentioned earlier, is they shouldn't change Danny Rand's race. Keith Chow was I think he was the first guy to actually mention that they should change Danny Rand and make him an Asian American. For those of you who don't know who Keith Chow is, he's the editor-in-chief of the Nerds of Color pulp culture blog. He's co-editor of the Asian American Comics anthologies, Secret Identities, and also the book Shattered, the Asian American Comics anthology. I think he wrote a trade paperback too, a superhero comic. But anyway, he was the one who kind of first started the whole he proposed the idea to change Iron Fist's race, and it made waves across the internet. And you had a lot of people weighing in with whether they thought they should do that or whether they shouldn't. And I'm just gonna keep my thoughts on this subject short. No, no, they just shouldn't change his race. I think changing his race is unnecessary. I don't think it's gonna add a whole lot to his character, and there are actually some aspects of his character development that are actually necessary for him to remain white. His naivete on how people are treated due to their race, because he's a wealthy, privileged white guy, and it's been pointed out by his friends Misty Knight, Luke Cage, and Colleen Wing, who are all people of color. Um, it's been pointed out to him the fact that he doesn't understand certain things about race because he hasn't had to see things from someone else's perspective, and they kind of poke fun at him, and at the same time kind of school him on these issues that he's just not really aware of. And it's been done more than one occasion in the comics. So this wouldn't work as well if Rand was Asian American. Obviously, they'd have to change things up if they wanted to get a similar message across, if they wanted to change his race. But I found out recently that since they announced who was going to play Danny Rand, they're not changing his race. So that's a non-issue. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually do go in that direction and actually try to point out some of these race issues in a way that doesn't seem heavy-handed, but at the same time is beneficial to the character's development and making Danny Rand a more well-rounded individual in the show. Once again, they really need to introduce him. They really need to introduce Shang-Chi. In all honesty, though, Shang-Chi could easily have his own show, but maybe if they introduce him in Iron Fist, eventually they can have his own show and really go into developing his character, and they could do it by the time they do another Defenders movie, which I mean, because I want to see, honestly, I wanted to see Heroes for Hire, but maybe if they call them the Defenders and still have elements of the Heroes for Hire theme in it, then I'd be happy with that too. But getting back on the subject, one of the things that they really need to do with this show is the whole intercutting, because they're more than likely going to do flashbacks of Rand and Kunlun, and the whole intercutting the plot with those flashbacks of Kunlun and what he's doing now as Iron Fist, which is what I think they might do. I don't know. But shows like Lost and currently Arrow have done this to the point. The whole intercutting the flashbacks and the current plot, they've done it to the point where it's just so played out to me. It also can be a bit disruptive to the main plot, having to jump back and forth in the show's timeline, especially when the flashbacks have a plot structure and a narrative all onto their own. Like if you took Arrow and you just cut out all the flashbacks and put them all together, it would tell its own whole story. And so you're simultaneously having to follow two different storylines for the same show, and it's especially not good if one of the plot lines or the subplots ends up being a bit more interesting than the other one, because that's happened a lot in Arrow. There was times where stuff happening in the past, like between him and Slade, ended up being more interesting to me than what was actually going on in the current present of the show, and sometimes it was vice versa. A lot of his flashback stuff, just especially with him and Katana and all that went on there, that stuff was actually more interesting to me than the regular show. And then when Slade was finally Deathstroke, when he got the Mirakuru, oh my god, when when he got that, that actually became more interesting than the flashbacks, and it just went back and forth, and so I think they should just keep it simple. They should have at least the beginning half of the first season be about Rand's intro into Kunlun and his eventual training and ascension, to the Iron Fist title. And then the second half should be him coming back to the city, meeting and befriending Luke Cage, and sparking up a romance with Misty Knight and just becoming a hero. Because I'm pretty sure I heard Misty Knight was gonna be in the show because she's a love interest. But she's also a very strong character all in her own right. So it would be cool to see her in the show as more than just Danny Rand's main squeeze. So, maybe they could include characters like the Steel Serpent, who's a master of the delayed death touch. Maybe he's working with Dasha Khan, the demonic warrior sorcerer, and maybe that's how you transition from Kunlun to the real world, or to back to the present, would be because those characters I think came from Kunlun, so he could be actually going after them, and that's how you also can include Shang-Chi, because maybe he's after them too, and that's how you give Shang-Chi more screen time that way. Just keep the plot structure simple while making the characters and the interactions and their development and their situations complex. That's something I think that is integral to this whole show. Because there's more ways to make a show complex than just having a script with all these twists and turns, and then it starts to become convoluted and to the point where the writers don't even know what they're doing anymore. Like, we don't need another Lost, please. But one of the most important things that's probably tied with the way they do the action in this show is that they should not by any means do the Mighty Whitey trope. And for those of you that don't know what the Mighty Whitey trope is, I'm going to get to that, but I really, really don't want to see anything of Rand, getting to Kunlun and becoming so adept at learning their culture, mastering their kung fu, and even though the denizens of Kunlun hated him because he's an outsider, they quickly come around, and then they turn around and they love him. And then it turns from the Mighty Whitey trope to the Mellow Yellow trope because there's a Chinese female character from the show who falls madly in love with him. Movies like The Last Samurai, the Tom Cruise film, followed this trope to the letter, and critics and Japanese people have been ripping that movie for it ever since. If the producers, if they really want to be taken seriously and not lose their audience and any kind of credibility that they would have for this show, that they've built up for the show, they really don't need to go in the Mighty Whitey trope direction. And once again, like I said earlier about diversifying Kunlun, and having different people, different ethnicities in the show, showing them in the show would help with not having that trope, not having the trope be so apparent. I mean, obviously he has to struggle. He has to earn the title of Iron Fist. He can't just show up and learn everything and learn their culture and ways and just become better at it than they have, because that would actually be a disservice to martial arts in general, because martial arts is a way of life. It's just not something you go to your karate classes down the street and you learn a few forms and you get a belt and then all of a sudden you're a master at karate. No, it's a way of life. Martial arts is a way of life, and and you have to show that in the movie. It's not, you can't treat it like how certain movies have in the past, where a guy comes, doesn't know anything, learns everything, and then is just the greatest ever. He's the reincarnation of Bruce Lee, and he's beating everyone, and nobody can touch him, and you just can't have that. So these are just some of my thoughts on what exactly would help make a really good Iron Fist TV show. And if any of you guys out there have any thoughts or any comments, I would love to hear them. I'm always interested in meeting people who, or talking with people are are very who love martial art films too. I guess me and Strident are gonna be doing a martial art movie review on his channel at some point. So I'm really hoping, or I can't wait to actually do that, because like I said, I love martial art films. I have more kung fu movies than I do like American movies. It's just something I've always loved as a kid and even as an adult. So yeah, that's gonna basically do it. I've got nothing else, and like I said, feel free to comment and all that fun stuff that people tell you to do at the end of YouTube videos. And I will catch you guys on the next Thrant. I'm Agent O, and I'm out. Peace.